Welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Here now is your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce.
Hello and welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections. I'm your host, President of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce, Chad Amond. I am delighted today to have on two individuals that are impactful in our community with the Blackburn Center. Jodie McGovern is the Community Relations Coordinator of the Blackburn Center, and Dr. Tim Holler is an Assistant Professor at the University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg, focusing on criminal justice, but he also serves on the men's advocacy at Blackburn. Folks, thank you very much for being on Westmoreland Community Connections. Jodie, let's start with you. I want to know, and the listeners want to know, a little bit about your background and how you got to be connected with the Blackburn Center.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me here and having us talk about Blackburn today. So I am from Pennsylvania. I relocated to Greensburg this past year. So I've been with Blackburn since Christmas. And I'm really loving working for this agency. So I've worked in nonprofit for a little over 10 years. I got my start through AmeriCorps, actually, at Girls Hope of Pittsburgh, when I was doing undergrad at Pitt. So I left for a while. I've moved all around, finished my education out west. And so I'm happy to be back in PA and doing this work and being in part of Westmoreland community.
So you have a connection with Pitt, and our other guest definitely has a connection with Pitt. Dr. Tim Holler is Assistant Professor at University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg, focusing on criminal justice, but also the connection with Blackburn. Tell us a little bit about that.
So a little bit about my background actually is I really got involved with criminal justice because I was a juvenile delinquent at one point in time. So I had my own run-ins with the law very young, some experience with victimizing other individuals, and I had to go through a process called restorative justice, where you sit down and you talk about the process of victimization and how you've harmed people. And that really, just being involved in the criminal justice system in that manner, is atypical of professors who do this now. But this was something that I knew very young that I needed to change the criminal justice system and help change the criminal justice system. So I came into this kind of differently than a lot of people do. When I started to get my degree, I got my undergraduate degree at Indiana University of Pennsylvania in criminal justice, decided to stick with it and went all the way through to my PhD, to their PhD program, and received my PhD in 2015. And as part of this process, I started looking at victimization in terms of restorative justice, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who are not familiar with restorative justice, and I'm not going to go into necessarily the specifics of it.
Yeah, well, let's give us... I think that we need to get an overview of restorative justice. Give that definition.
Okay. So it's a little bit different. We have our criminal justice system that is all about punishing the criminal offender. So we want to find out who committed the crime, why they committed it, and how we can punish them and that's what we call justice in our society. Restorative justice is a little bit different, where we take a victim-centered approach, where we're looking at victimization, what harm has been done to the victim, what harm has been done to the community, and how can we repair that harm while also holding the criminal offender accountable. And there are multiple ways we can do restorative justice, but that's kind of the long and short of it, is really focusing on the victim specifically. So how that relates to the work with Blackburn, I came to Pitt Greensburg in 2013, the fall of 2013, and there was already some work going on campus with the Blackburn Center with Dr. Sheila Confer, who works with the Blackburn Center, the director, Ann Emmerling as well. So I kind of just naturally went right into that and started doing some of the work that we do on our campus with the Blackburn Center. And another reason why this is so near and dear to my heart is that, as many people probably have, I've experienced domestic violence in my own life as well when I was young. So this is something that I feel very strongly about, and I feel that men particularly need to be engaged in these conversations, which is how I got involved with the men's advocacy group at the Blackburn Center.
Jodie, I think that the listeners need to know. I mean, I think that sometimes you know the Blackburn Center, you know it by name, but what is the mission of the Blackburn Center, and what are some of the services that the Blackburn Center provides?
You have a really good point, is that a lot of people kind of recognize this as one sort of thing in the community, and so we try to make sure that we expand that vision. So our mission is twofold. We provide services to victims of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and then also all other types of violence that happens in the community. And not everyone knows that about us, that we are available for services of other types of violence and crime, other types of harassment. So, and then the second half of that mission is that we work heavily in prevention work. So we are in the community doing education and prevention almost every day. And so people, maybe if you have kids in the school system here, they've seen us in their schools and you can ask them about that. But not everyone knows that we are available for speaking and engagement and trainings. So that's a huge part of what we do.
Well, when you bring up violence and crime, give some examples. I think that the listeners need to have some examples of what it is that you provide services in domestic violence and in the crimes that are being committed in the county.
Sure. So all of our services are free, confidential, and they're for women, children, and men. So we do provide services for children and men as well. We're not just women's services. So we make sure that that's clear. Any type of violence which can fall on a continuum, a spectrum of, harassment. It really depends on how the victim perceives how the action towards them has been perceived. And so there's all types of violence for different reasons, power-based or gender-based, not just sexual assault. So the starting point for that is our 24/7 hotline. We have a hotline that's answered by trained crisis counselors all the time. You don't have to be in crisis. You can be a loved one. You can be a resource person, a social worker. Anybody can call the hotline. And we have access to tons of resources. So anybody can call and ask questions 24 hours a day and get info about all our other services. So really that's the only piece you have to remember. And we see people for all types of reasons. It could be historical trauma, something that happened in childhood. And now because of the Me Too movement, a lot of people are coming forward and they're saying, oh, you know what, this happened to me a really long time ago and now I'm ready to talk about it. And so they come forward with some of those issues. So we have counseling, we have intimate partner violence, a shelter for victims of intimate partner violence, and we shelter men and women and children separately and in confidential locations. Our counseling is free. We have support groups. We have advocates. Advocates work in the legal system and medical system. So they'll come out for PFA hearings, protection from abuse orders. They go to all the hearings, the magistrate. We show up in the hospitals. We'll support victims when they're there for a rape kit. And then all the other work that goes into prevention and community work.
You bring up prevention.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that the primary goal would be not to provide service to somebody that has been assaulted, but to prevent it in the first place, right?
Correct.
So what does prevention look like?
That's a really big question, a good question. It's multifold. So it's partially reactionary, where we're reaching people as adults and kind of changing and looking at ideas that are perpetuated in the community. And then we're looking at kids. And so with kids, we're doing school programs. This past school year, we've had programs for over 14,000 students in Westmoreland County. So we're at grades all the way from pre-K through high school through university. We're all the universities in the community. And those things look like good touch, bad touch, anti-bullying, frenemies, talking about sexting, intimate teen dating violence, age-appropriate curriculum at all ages, talking about how to be friends, how to have respect, equality.
So what are some of the things that you are teaching the children in the schools that say anti-bullying or anti-sexting? What are some of the key components that you teach them?
Those are big questions. We actually have a whole department of education specialists. So these are women who go into the schools every day, all year long. And right now we're running summer programs. We have one at the library. And so at the younger ages, we're talking about, there's body parts that are protected and how to talk to and trust an adult, how to speak up for yourself, how to have respect for people who are different from you. Really the basis of the primary messages of anti-violence and peace, really, that aren't just gender-based. They're, how to show someone respect, how to ask someone who's different than you how they want to be treated. So really basic messages. And then when we get older into high school, things are more complicated. And we create safe spaces where kids can talk about difficult questions like, it's illegal for teenagers to be sexting because those pictures are pornographic, and what the ramifications of having that material out there looks like. But we're giving them a safe space where they can have a conversation instead of just being told what to do.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Hometown Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. We're talking with Jodie McGovern, Community Relations Coordinator at the Blackburn Center, and Dr. Tim Holler, Assistant Professor at the University of Pitt at Greensburg, focusing on criminal justice. But Tim, we're going to focus a little bit aside from your professorship on the men's advocacy group that you participate in the Blackburn Center. How did you get involved with that, and what does the men's advocacy group do?
So one of the ways I got involved with this is that actually one of our former students who worked with me at the Center for Applied Research at the University of Pitt Greensburg became kind of his role was coordinator of what we were originally called as the Men as Allies group. So having him, who was a former student, kind of running that, it was just this natural connection to this men's advocacy group. And this is, like I said, this is something that is near and dear to my heart, just with my own experiences for domestic violence. So when I heard there was a group out there that was trying to engage men on this discussion about sexual and domestic violence and gender-based violence, it was kind of just this natural connection for me to get involved with that and the role that I'm in. And I think the platform that I have specifically as a professor, being able to reach undergraduate students, a lot of male undergraduate students who are going into a profession that has a lot of toxic masculinity, is what we refer to it as, in policing specifically. I think it's good for me to get involved with something like this and be a part of this that's going on in our community.
So what are some of the things that you are teaching these students, prevention, and why and what?
So part of what I do on campus is kind of twofold. I'm part of the men's advocacy group for Blackburn, but also what we do on our campus in terms of, and Jodie was talking about prevention efforts, is we run a survey in conjunction with the Blackburn Center, with Seton Hill University as well, about our students, our incoming freshman students or first-year students' attitudes about sexual and domestic violence, and gender-based violence and gender norms. So one of the things we do is run a survey every semester with our incoming students to kind of tally up and understand where they stand about their attitudes towards these things, and then we try to develop co-curricular and curricular programming that can address some of those shortcomings that we're seeing in the survey. So if some of our students don't understand what consensual sex is, we spend the time doing curricular programming that addresses things like consent and affirmative consent, so that there isn't that confusion when people are out having fun on the weekends between what's going on between the two individuals, and we can have actual consent that comes down to that. So there are some concerns, especially on college campuses these days, with this issue. So as a men's advocate, what I can do and what I've done for the community so far and how I bring this to the university is we're really just trying to engage men in this discussion. Typically when we look at domestic and sexual violence and gender-based violence, this has been what's considered a quote-unquote women's issue, but what we're really understanding is this is everyone's issue to deal with, and particularly when you have men who are the perpetrators mostly in most instances of gender-based violence, then we need to engage them in the conversation. And that's part of what I'm able to do, and that's part of what our group does through the men's advocacy in the Blackburn Center.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Hometown Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. We're talking with Jodie McGovern and Dr. Tim Holler from the Blackburn Center, and Tim's connection with the assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg. We're going to be right back after these messages.
This is Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. If you have a suggestion for a topic, or if your nonprofit organization would like to be featured on this program, call us during regular business hours at 724-216-1200.
Welcome back. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Hometown Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. I'm your host, Chad Amond, president of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. Our guests today are Jodie McGovern. Jodie is the Community Relations Coordinator for the Blackburn Center, and Dr. Tim Holler. Tim is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg for focusing on criminal justice. But Tim's other role, I guess, Tim, is that your other role, is the men's advocacy group at the Blackburn Center. I guess some of the listeners that are listening to the show right now are probably thinking, well, this is probably a woman issue, right? This is something that women deal with primarily. Why would men be involved in the Blackburn Center?
Right, and typically that is how this issue has been addressed. Gender-based violence specifically has been seen as a women's issue. And that alone, just mentioning that it's a women's issue, is a problem in and of itself, because we know that most men are perpetrators of this violence, this type of violence. And that's not to say that women can't also be perpetrators of gender-based violence, but if you look at the statistics around sexual and domestic violence specifically, by and large, it is males who are perpetrating this type of violence. And, prevention efforts are great, intervention efforts are great, but those do not necessarily address the problem of men who victimize people in general, whether it's women, other men, whatever it may be. So part of what we're trying to do is get men engaged in this conversation. One of the more concerning factors about all this is that what we know about sexual and domestic violence is probably only about half the picture. One of the things that we talk about in criminal justice in a lot of my classes specifically is what we call the dark figure of crime. And that is all the crime that does not go reported. So we know that only about 50% of assaults, if that much, actually gets reported to police. So there are all these things taking place that aren't even being addressed by the criminal justice system. So trying to engage men is really trying to end this violence where it starts, with men specifically. So part of what we do as the men's advocacy group is we have conversations with the group of men that we have right now, which include members of the academic community, other universities around the area, community members, lay members of the community. We also have a police officer that sits on our advocacy group, and we just try to have these discussions about things like masculinity, what it means to be a man. As a male, we kind of, when you grow up, you're always told don't cry, right? You can't cry at things. That's something that girls do. Only girls cry, right? Or we get called sissies, or because we don't do certain types of things, we're not masculine enough. And there is some real harm that comes from that, because what ends up happening, and recently we've seen a statistic that men are 4 times more likely than women to commit suicide, and part of that reason, I think specifically, is because men aren't able to talk about their feelings. They're not able to talk about the issues that bother them. They're not able to talk about things like sadness and being harmed by other people, because we're told not to do that. We're told to keep that inside. And I'll give an example of that. Recently, I was at my nephew's Little League baseball game, and undefeated season. They were doing great. It was the last game of the season, so there was a lot riding on it, and you could feel kind of the tension in the air. They were losing in the last inning. They were down by 3 runs, and the kid who was catching, the young gentleman who was catching, was, I think his father was on the team. His father was coaching the team, and you could see that he was visibly upset, because he knew they were down by 3 runs. They were probably going to lose this game. It was getting close to the end of the game, and he was getting visibly upset. First thing his father does is start to scream at him, "Don't you dare cry. I don't want to see your tears while you're out here on the field." And there are other people around that can hear this. The game actually ends. They end up losing. Still had a great season, but this kid was visibly upset, and one of the first things his father does is raise his fist to him as if he's going to hit him. And for me, sitting there, this was kind of my moment of, this is why I do this kind of work. This is why we have to engage men in these conversations. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to lose a baseball game and be upset about that. But what that kid's now going to go do is equate that sadness with aggression. And this is what often happens for males specifically, is rather than addressing things like sadness or having empathy for other people, we deal with everything through violence and through aggression, through anger, which is why you see men perpetrating this type of violence specifically. So this is really what we're trying to do, is get as many men as we possibly can engaged in this conversation, so that we can kind of shift the cultural norms about how we talk about men's roles in violence specifically, and being able to deal with their own emotions, have empathy for other people, be able to handle other people appropriately, rather than through aggression specifically.
Right. Well, that's a good story, and I think oftentimes people see that more often than they should.
Absolutely.
But Jodie, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about oftentimes, and one of the benefits of Westmoreland County is we have a low crime rate, but there are still numbers out there that will probably make some of the listeners' mouths agape, and share some of those numbers that have the impact with domestic violence in our community.
Sure. And so kind of what Tim is saying, I really appreciate how he articulated our work with men. And the majority of perpetrators are men, but the majority of men are not perpetrators. So I want to emphasize that we see men as like advocates and allies in this work, and that we invite them to be, with us. And so a lot of these numbers in the work we do is not tangible to everyone, because they may not be involved or they may not see it. And so I have some of our numbers for our past fiscal year. We'll have our new ones out in our annual report coming up soon. But these are the numbers from last year. So Blackburn provided over 4,000 nights of shelter to individuals and children, almost 10,000 hours of free counseling and therapy, nearly 2,000 legal accompaniments, over 200 medical contacts with victims. And so the medical staff in the community, this is just for Westmoreland County. So we only serve Westmoreland County, and these numbers are only Westmoreland County. But the hospitals are trained to call us. So if there's a victim in the hospital who may look like they could use our services, they call our advocates, and we respond 24 hours a day to be there as a support person. So that's over 200 medical contacts. We've seen 14,000 students this year. Over 200 trainings to adults and professionals, so that's part of my role. In the community, I speak to adults, I do adult education, I do professional company trainings, and then we work on all the local college campuses.
So you do the training and the speaking, that's one of your primary roles.
Yes.
Give the listeners an understanding of how would they contact you to speak, and what are some of the programs that you would offer speaking? I saw online one of the ones was adult bullying and workplace violence, right?
Yeah.
And so give an overview of what are some of the programs that you speak about, and how would a listener get contacted with you to schedule that?
That's a great question. So that's my primary role. I do PR and community communication, and then most days of the week I'm out doing education and speaking events. So you can call the office number or our hotline number. Do you want me to give our hotline number?
Yeah, sure.
The local number is 724-836-1122. And then we do have a toll-free number, 1-888-832-2272. So those are our hotline numbers 24/7. And so you could call that number or the main office line for speaking. All of our speaking is free except for a handful of professional trainings. And so we can come talk about any issue your group may be interested in. Recently, I spoke with Ray of Hope on suicide prevention and how that relates to the work we do. So we'll develop speaking to any subject that relates to us, but we just try to do a lot of awareness building. So we'll do talks on sexual assault, domestic violence, elder abuse, elder fraud, human trafficking. We're part of a human trafficking task force.
Elder fraud.
Yes.
Elder fraud. Talk about that.
So people target, so elder abuse is a mandated report. So people who experience elder abuse, those are adults, I believe, over 65, over 64. And so we have people in our agency who specialize in that. We speak at all the local services that are for elders. But people target elders for a fraud specifically online. And so we just build awareness around that, teach them how to be safe, how to protect themselves, how to report, who to contact. And so we try to find all those niche pocket populations that may be taken advantage of in the community, and we have someone who specializes in each of those niches so that they can be reached. So we provide talks on all of those. I provide a professional training, and this is a wraparound, this is a comprehensive service, is the workplace harassment. And so that includes policy review, a climate survey within your company, a 2-hour employee training on harassment prevention. And this is in place of kind of the old-fashioned sexual harassment prevention. This is kind of a new way based on the EEOC. It's really comprehensive about building like a safe and equal workplace. So I really love that training. And we work with the management and just to build a workplace that's really thriving and full of respect.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Hometown Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. We're talking with Jodie McGovern, Community Relations Coordinator at the Blackburn Center, and Dr. Tim Holler. Tim is an assistant professor at the University of Pitt at Greensburg, focusing on criminal justice. But he also is a key advocate for the advocacy group at the Blackburn Center, focusing on the men's role in eliminating and educating on domestic violence. Jodie and Tim, I don't know who is going to answer this question, but what does it look like to build an informed community on trauma-informed and supportive and bystander intervention and all of that stuff? How will we make the community better and reduce those numbers that you shared with us?
I love that question because that's Blackburn's goal. Our goal is to be, first of all, we've been doing this work for over 40 years. We want to be seen as the trauma-informed agency in the community to provide those services. But we just want to build a community that's trauma-informed, meaning we know that trauma exists everywhere, we're sensitive to that, and that we want to meet people's needs. But we want to keep people educated and aware so that we can start checking our ideas, checking beliefs that are harmful and perpetuating violence. And so building awareness in the community, which means invite us to speak. Just invite us into every environment that you're a part of to come speak and build awareness. Promoting bystander intervention in a simple terms, that just means if you witness something, to learn how to intervene safely in a way that stops those behaviors from continuing and escalating. And so we provide training on bystander intervention. All the universities practice bystander intervention, and that's something we're developing and have developed. And that's just a way of, it's a catalyst in the community to say, these actions aren't okay. Harassing people is not okay, sexual assault's not okay, and there's people here who care enough to intervene.
We're gonna round it out with the end of the interview of how can the community become more involved? How can they become involved in the Blackburn Center? I know you have a huge event in early spring, a walk a mile in her shoes. Maybe you can just get involved in that and help to support the fundraising. But if you want to get deeper involved, how would you get a little bit more involved, Tim?
Actually, if you're a man and you want to get involved in our men's advocacy group, we are always open to having more people come in and have discussions with us about this. And really the goal, for at least for men who are part of this group, is to build a solid base in our community of leaders who can go out and have these discussions with other men who are teachers in universities and in elementary schools, that can talk to young boys about how to be men without doing some of the things we've constantly done about, like I mentioned earlier, not expressing your emotions and those things. So there are all kinds of ways to get involved. The Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, which I emceed last year, is a great event that anyone can be involved with. And I think we have it around April 21st or 22nd, whatever weekend that typically falls on, or whatever weekend day that typically falls on. But the Blackburn Center is open to basically having anybody who wants to be involved in these processes get involved. They can be a volunteer for the hotline, so there's training to be a volunteer for the hotline. They are always looking for shelter items that's on their website, so if you want to check out the Blackburn website and donate some items for the women's shelter, they're always looking for those. Obviously, being a men's advocate in our Fearless Advocates for Men engagement group, inviting us to speak, inviting the Blackburn Center to speak is a great way to get involved. They're always looking for donations, again, to help with shelter projects and the things that they do. You can also sign up for the email list and follow Blackburn Center on Facebook, which we're always trying to grow the social media following as well.
Jodie McGovern and Dr. Tim Holler, thank you very much for the work that you are doing in our community with the Blackburn Center, and Tim, with your work in criminal justice as a professor at the University of Pitt at Greensburg. If you want to join the Blackburn Center and get more involved, jump online at blackburncenter.org. That's blackburncenter.org, or give them a call at 724-836-1122. That's 724-836-1122. You've been listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Join us next week, same time, same place, for another edition of Westmoreland Community Connections. Thanks for listening, everyone.
This has been Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings in and around Westmoreland County. Join us again next week on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB.